Hey folks, today we're reacting to Why Old MMOs Feel Better, MMOPinion by Strife. I like how the thumbnail says our old MMOs better because it's more clickbaity. I respect that. But I'm excited for this video because I've played Final Fantasy XIV like up to basically not the current patch but through Endwalker. I've played WoW, Shadowlands, and some of the raids and stuff in both games too. I've also played Guild Wars 2 up to max level. I need to do a lot of the expansion content still, so can't really say too much about that game, but I enjoy MMOs. But I'm curious like what exactly he'll point to and how far he'll go with it. I know I've seen his videos before off stream, and I generally like a lot of what he has to say, and I feel like he is good at summarizing his opinion. All right, let's go.
Many long-time MMO players fondly reminisce about the days gone when MMOs were far less optimised than they are now, when the games were more of a struggle to play. The old guard complains about today's modern MMO conveniences like tutorials, fast travel, quest markers, minimaps, group finders, and the lack of need to communicate. Many say MMOs have lost the social soul they had so long ago and simply aren't as memorable. However, many of the modern
Yeah,
advancements people blame were added as a result of players directly asking for them. Is it
I was one of the people who asked for it. I was like I played WoW when I was like 12 or 11, and I didn't like to group up or anything. I was actually like more of a solo player, and I played the game more as I made it more solo friendly. I started playing in Burning Crusade though, so it was already like when that started happening, which is interesting to me. I do like. I also have fond memories of the before times, though the vague memories.
possible to design a game to be worse and yet in doing so actually make the player's long-term experience of it better? Can giving the player a less optimized, less immediately fun experience actually result in them remembering the game more fondly, and indeed even recommending it to players precisely because of the fact it is less optimized?
I play Guild Wars 1, and I like that he's overlaying the screen with the Guild Wars 1 right now. That game I have great memories of.
The answer is both yes and no. It's a
Okay.
paradox of adversity within game design, and it's one of the main reasons modern MMOs feel the way they do. It's also what Blizzard was trying to get at when they said, you think you do, but you don't. So let's discuss the actual psychology behind it. As usual, a massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who keep the channel going. More information on how you can support at the end. For now, let's begin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Strife. I've been making videos about MMORPG design for years, and one thing that I hear repeatedly from both old players who played the game back in the day and new players who are just discovering them is that older MMOs were better. Now, better is a very
Yeah.
subjective word. It's hard to define, it's different for everyone. But with so many old games still online, like the original EverQuest, or classic versions of modern games being released, like World of Warcraft Classic or old school RuneScape, there must be some element of design, some choice beyond just nostalgia, some reason people keep going back to older designed games. Over the years, I've tried to make videos explaining MMO design, breaking down design elements, comparing choices. I've covered the idea of the meta, the chosen one narrative trope, fast travel, endgame, abundance of MMOs themselves, microtransactions, graphics, level scaling, but now I think I've managed to distill it down to the simplest, most base reason. I'm going to call it the paradox of adversity within game design. It's not the catchiest title, I know, but it explains why making something better for the player in the short term can sometimes remove its ability to have a long-term impact. It's all to do with the human experience of overcoming adversity. Consider the following. If something, say a task or a challenge, is immediately easy, it will have a high number of people attempt it and complete it, because it's accessible to a greater number of people, and because a great number of people tend to enjoy easier things, the task will see a relatively high retention rate. You could consider things like sitting on the sofa binge watching a TV show, or ordering a takeaway, getting dressed in whatever was lying on the floor, calling off a planned meeting because it's raining and you don't want to go. It's low effort, but immediate reward. On the opposite end of the spectrum are very hard tasks with very high rates of immediate failure, or a great deal of input effort required. Fewer people will even attempt it, let alone succeed. And because people don't enjoy failure, many will quit if the first few attempts don't succeed. This could be leaving the sofa to go to a gym, applying for a much harder job than you've currently got, cooking a full 3-course meal from scratch, dressing up in smart or complex clothes, or attending a meeting if the circumstances are against you and you don't want to go. It could be learning a language or training for a difficult sports event such as a triathlon. It's very high effort, with a very delayed reward. The paradox is the immediate reward for the low effort input is never as high or as satisfying as the delayed reward for the high input process.
Okay, just using the examples he used, I do feel like this isn't necessarily true. Like when I watch a really good TV show, I feel better than I do going to the gym. But I get where he's going with it. And I do think that how he's applying it to video games is generally pretty true.
Intensity of the reward and the long-term value of it is directly related to the complexity and difficulty to achieve the process. Put simply, if something is easy to do, you'll feel good in the process but not care about the reward in the long term. You likely won't even create a memory of either the process or the reward because it's nothing special. But if something is difficult to do, you'll likely dislike the process of doing it, but then the long-term reward of having done it will have more intrinsic value to you, and the memory you create will be much more intense. This is human nature. We want the easy and immediate, but we place much more long-term value on the completion of difficulty. Nobody wants to struggle, but everyone wants the feeling and satisfaction earned from struggling and succeeding.
I think, sorry, going back to the thing, because this is interesting to me, I feel like maybe it also like different people get rewards and values from different things, right? Like how I watch a TV show and get really into a TV show is different than how other people and what they extract from a TV show. So like for me, obviously I've already said like sometimes when I watch a TV show, if it's really good, that feels more valuable than going to the gym for me. Um Maybe like the right thing to compare would be like a really good gym workout, but still I think like a really good TV show can exceed that for me. So I think some of the examples he was giving isn't really what may have been perfect. But I think when it comes to video games, there's also people who just favor like the high spectacle and don't really care about how much they're getting, how much difficulty they're deriving from it. Um, like I have some friends like that who play games on like the easiest difficulty just to see the cutscenes and stuff. But there's also like people who do get enjoyment from the highest difficulty and from that challenge and who and I don't think this is necessarily related because I also get enjoyment out of higher difficulty, but there's also people who prefer going to the gym over like a really good TV show no matter how good the TV show is, which is interesting. I feel like it's important to note that like sure, this might not necessarily apply to you specifically, but I think there is a large MMO population, especially the folks who are active, that this does apply to.
We don't enjoy the process of overcoming adversity, but we do grow from it. Indeed, the moments of unplanned struggle often become some of our fondest memories. It's very important to understand that the word struggle in this context is not life-changing trauma. It's not extremely negative experiences that you wish you could remove. It means less than optimal, unexpected. It means more difficult than you originally anticipated. It's not extremely damaging, it's challenging within the context of the game.
I guess, sorry, real quick. TV shows, right? The TV shows that change your opinion and like unsettle you and like go away you weren't expecting, those are more memorable. So that's very true. I think that does relate to video games a lot.
If you go camping with your friends and everything is absolutely fine, you'll likely have an okay trip. But if on the second night it begins to absolutely pour with rain and you discover there's a rip in the tent, you will likely hate it in the moment, but look back on it fondly, laughing with the group as you all reminisce the struggle you overcame. It's often the moments of struggle that we look back on and smile about. We defeated the enemy and we see value in that. If you ask older MMO players some of their best memories, they'll often tell you about all the adversity they overcame, standing selling items in the EverQuest tunnel or the Falador Bank.
I do think it's a mix here. Like, yes, people always tell the stories of the struggle and of the trials, right? But those are also just the better stories usually. That's like I also look back on like the times where I just like when I tell a story, I focus on the trial, but when I actually am like looking back on my happy memories, I focus on the happiness I feel, which is usually what comes after the reward I get or whatever. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't know. I'm on spur of the moment reactor. Let's go.
Completing quests without guides, phoning friends in real life to organise a raid. There exists in design a Goldilocks zone of player difficulty, where something is not too easy and not too hard, it's just right. You're not going to frustrate the player and prevent them from finishing the game, but when they do finish the game, they're going to feel an immense satisfaction that they have overcome a perfectly balanced challenge. So how does this all relate back to MMORPGs? Well, remember when Blizzard told you think you do, but you don't?
And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't. Remember when you had to like spam cities and say, need a tank, need a tank, need a tank during the Burning Crusade days? You don't remember that because now you just push a button that says go to the dungeon. You don't want to do that.
Here's what they actually meant. It's two elements of human psychology combining. The abundance of choice, meaning we don't stick at one thing when it gets challenging and can easily switch, and the value we gain from overcoming a challenge. Many years ago, there weren't as many MMOs, so you have a relatively captured audience. If you didn't like one game, you could go to another, but you'd very quickly cycle through all possible games. The player base didn't have great variety, and a lot of these MMOs were difficult. The players would face adversity in all games, such as no group finders, meaning you had to talk to people, and creating a group could take a while. No quest markers on the minimap, or minimaps themselves, or even in your journal, so you had to write down NPCs' names and locations. No market boards or global trading systems, so it was player-to-player trade only. No tutorial, meaning you were placed directly into the world and you relied on the community to help you, and many games came on physical CDs and took hours to install, with the process often going wrong. This isn't the game itself, but it's still part of an adversity experience.
I will say that actually is like, I remember those times when I was a kid trying to download Final Fantasy XI, trying to first I got WoW Burning Crusade the expansion but not the original game, so I couldn't play it for like half a year until my parents got me the original game. They were a little upset with me. But I got to play a Blood Elf the second I started, and that was fun. But besides that, I think like it's just one of those interesting things, you know? Kind of forgot what I was saying. Continue.
Adversity means a difficult or unpleasant situation, and overcoming it is a good feeling. Now, the adversity in a game doesn't just need to be the boss design or the gameplay. It can be the meta elements, such as having to play a game without a guide, being unable to switch servers and play with your friends, corpse runs, experience debt, almost cryptic levels of description for both quest guides and item descriptions. Older games had a lot of adversity within them. And as we know, while people like the sense of accomplishment which comes with overcoming adversity, they don't always like adversity in the moment. People quit difficult things while they're still in the difficult bit. With older MMOs, this wasn't a major problem for player retention because the players simply didn't have many other places to go. The end result was a hemmed-in player base with a sparse selection of MMOs, all of which had heavy amounts of adversity, and your choice was overcome it or stop playing. And if you stopped playing, then you simply stopped caring. And if you did overcome it, you felt intense personal pride. But as more MMOs were made and player choice increased, the designers saw both opportunities and issues.
I think also something that you can note too is that back in the day when I would get stuck at a part in WoW, like some quests, I would just default back to socializing with my friends or the random people on the server, the guild I was in or whatever. And I think nowadays MMOs are less that social space. Discord is that social space for gamers or whatever else. Forums, Reddit, whatever. Not really forums, but subreddits. Twitter. And like, as a result, you don't have like that community to fall back on and continue to be engrossed in the world while you're thinking about how am I going to tackle this difficult moment along with what he's saying. I think it's like all working together.
If they made the player face too much adversity, the players wouldn't push on because they had no other choice, they would leave because now they did have choice. And this put designers into a strange position. They needed to make the systems the players would experience immediately very easy to prevent the players leaving, but in doing so, they were reducing the potential long-term connection the player would have to that system because no one remembers the easy accomplishments. Take the group finder. Without it, players are forced to talk and communicate and connect. Bonds will form, friendships, rivalries. You have to time your gameplay sessions to your guild. The act of forming the group becomes a satisfying ritual itself, and when the group is formed, it will likely stick together because the process of forming another is difficult. The process of forming the group is the adversity, and the feeling of having formed one is now substantial. But then the group finder comes in to remove the adversity of forming the group, and in doing so also removes the feeling of reward of forming it. It's positive for players with very little time, but negative for players who value the process of making the group. The lack of quest markers on your minimap, or indeed the lack of a detailed map at all, or the lack of fast travel, means you now face adversity of talking to every NPC, finding a quest, memorizing the world, learning the lay of the land, or becoming friends with a class who could teleport you around. The act of exploring and progressing was the adversity. That was the challenge. It wasn't easy, but for those who could do it, it was fulfilling. Then the minimaps, teleport spells, fast travel, and icons and quest helpers and auto run came along because players were leaving the game before even finding the quests due to the difficulty of the process, and it had to be made easier to increase player retention, or the players would leave for a game which was doing it. Again, in doing so, you are removing the adversity of learning the land at the expense of the player's long-term connection to the land.
I think, like, surely there's a way in the middle, right? It's like, I feel like romanticizing like a game being hardcore is flawed because like as like even as like in general as like someone who enjoys video games, I want to see other people enjoy video games. I like when my little sister can get into a game, and not every game has to be for every person, but like if a game can't support an audience, then like if it's too hardcore and too niche to support an audience, then that's kind of a problem. I think like a lot of hardcore games, they don't necessarily suffer from just the concept of hardcore being bad, but just that they are hardcore in the wrong ways. And like the folks who are making it don't necessarily know what, like it's really hard to make a game hardcore in the right way versus just accessible, I think. I don't know. I'm not an expert here.
Most players simply don't have a very long attention span, or a great deal of patience to deal with failure or time-consuming systems, so game designers needed to remove any and all roadblocks to failure, and this became a double-edged sword because they were now taking the process of adversity and resulting satisfaction and replacing it with a mundane, easy process and no emotional reward. This paradox of adversity can be applied to lots of MMORPG design elements. There used to be fewer MMOs, so players had less choice, meaning you could make your game more difficult. You could add in more adversity, whether that's the difficulty of the enemies, the quests, or even understanding the systems the game is made up of. Players would have to conquer them, and so be given the reward for conquering them. Ironically now, if something is too difficult, players will leave and go to another MMO because there is so much choice. It is incredibly ironic that the design which sets up satisfaction, adversity, is also the design which drives players away. In short, if you fill your MMO with player adversity, systems which the player must overcome, it will feel incredibly satisfying when a player advances through it, but it is also far more likely the average player will quit before reaching that satisfaction, because the process is difficult. And if you fill your game with easy systems which remove adversity, it is now much more likely that players will stick around and finish your game, but also they will feel very little connection to it because they never had to overcome adversity to get there. Difficult experience means less immediate fun, but a stronger long-term appreciation of it. An easy experience means more immediate fun, but a weaker long-term appreciation of it.
I do think like I like games like Final Fantasy XIV where like the main story is pretty easy, unless you're doing it like release week. Then some trials can be quite long and painful, but still easy for you. But besides that, like then they allow you the optional like higher difficulties, or like in single player games, right? Like I just played a bunch of Kingdom Hearts, so I'm thinking of like critical mode stuff and then the post game stuff. And like I think MMOs kind of do that too, like right? Like, and I think that's like a good in the middle way to get to cater to both crowds, but it can also be very annoying to level through the whole experience just to get to the part that you want. Like, I'm lucky because I enjoy both. I know a lot of people only enjoy one or the other, and I don't know what the best way is to cater to every crowd at once. It's hard.
You only need to look at the modern day video game difficulty mythos to see how we as players value overcoming adversity. The Pandaren who leveled to maximum without leaving the starting zone. Swampletics taking on the Theatre of Blood while locked entirely inside Mauritania. Let Me Solo Her, killing Melania wearing only a pot on his head. The Happy Hob, performing no-hit runs of the Soulsborne games, sometimes consecutively. Rendy achieving the level 3 Fire Cape in old school RuneScape, finishing the Mario games without collecting any coins. We value and respect those who overcome adversity in games, and if that player is us, we end up valuing and respecting ourselves. So the reason many players have fond memories of older MMOs and will tell new players that older games are better is because they contained a lot more adversity and playing them demanded you overcome it, giving you as a player that deep sense of satisfaction which comes with doing that. They may not be fun in the moment, but they are infinitely more satisfying to look back on. Modern day MMORPGs have removed as much adversity as they can because that improves the early to mid-game experience. The irony, of course, is you will retain more players, but you won't be generating those very human, very intense, very memorable experiences that come with overcoming an adverse system. It's why killing a boss after 100 attempts feels better than killing the boss after one attempt. You have achieved something difficult. The irony, of course, is that most players won't stick around for 100 attempts. They will declare it too difficult and move on to a different game. Many players...
I think what he like beyond what I was just said about some games having optional stuff that you can do to increase the difficulty, like it is true that separating that from the leveling experience, like I get what he's saying here and I agree with a lot of it. Like I think I'm mostly nitpicking so far with some minor contentions. But like overall what he says about there just being like this element there in older games where they had larger amounts of people and they all had this shared experience they basically had to go through to play the type of game they wanted. It was like a very cool dynamic and a very fun one. And like sure, like Final Fantasy 14, sorry, I played this a lot recently, which is why I'm referencing it so much. Like you have the main story quest where it's like, oh, these moments were really cool. But it's almost never like, oh, this fight was really hard. Especially for like I think also like average gamer skills also increase. So it's harder for like average skills increase, but also the bottom's lower and the top is higher, right? So like it's even harder to create a unified story experience that challenges everyone. Like I'm sure like playing through Final Fantasy's duty quests, right? Like they're always considered really easy. And I guess that's why they have an easy mode, right? Like I guess like you can argue that like maybe they should just introduce an easy mode that you can always select. But I think a lot of people don't like doing that. So I don't know. Maybe that is the better route though, right? Like have like the typical experience, at least like decently challenging that has like some sort of thing to learn, but then something like really easy that you can always choose to do. Maybe that's the play. And just if like you're too like if you think too highly of yourself to choose easy and you get frustrated and hate the game because of that, then well, probably not that many people are like that silly and also tough shit. Yeah.
Ask for easy routes to be added because they focus on the gameplay experience of right now more than the long-term experience and satisfaction gained by conquering a challenge. The skill in games design is to find that Goldilocks zone where a game is challenging and rewarding while not being frustrating to the point of making a player quit. Older MMOs had much less competition. Players couldn't just leave for another game at a moment's notice, and even if they did, it would be just as difficult. So that Goldilocks zone was much broader for older MMOs. When Blizzard said, you think you do but you don't, what they meant was they believed a modern day MMO player base would quit classic WoW due to the adversity in the game's design, the lack of group finder and the lack of quest giver's location on the minimap, before they were able to reach the satisfying level of WoW Classic and value the experience that overcoming the adversity gave them. Modern Blizzard design seems to be remove all adversity at the expense of all long-term satisfaction. So the next time you hear an older MMO player saying they want old-style MMOs back, what they likely mean is, while they may not remember the less fun process of playing the game, they miss the end feeling of overcoming adversity that the game gave them. But what do you think? Should modern MMOs be designed with fewer features so players have to push through adversity to gain the satisfaction of overcoming it, or should the adversity be removed to increase early game player retention at the cost of long-term satisfaction? Or should self-imposed limitations, such as RuneScape's Iron Man mode, be adopted by the game industry and made available for self-imposed adversity? What's the best design choice here? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you again for watching. Another massive thank you to the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who keep the channel alive. You can support from only £1 a month. Check the video description for links to the Patreon, Twitch, Twitter and Discord. And as always, have a great day.
I wanted to give him the full plug because he deserves it. So I think, like, in my view, it really is like that third route where you give optional difficulty to folks at every point of the game. I think that, like, because then it allows you to have those stories, and it also allows the easier folk, like, instead of having an opt-in easy system, have an opt-in hard system, right? Because then, like, A, you get to feel better about yourself, B, normal folk, like the folk who are just doing the normal difficulty, get to feel like, oh wow, like, even if I'm the like, even if they're, like, really bad, right, and they would normally be on easy, the normal is scaled appropriately for them. Or maybe, like, after they die the 6th time, it gets a little easier, you know? So I do think, like, that third route is, like, a really good option. I think, yeah, like, I feel like that's just it, right? I wonder what the comments say. You articulate the biggest problems with today's MMOs that no one is pointing out. Really appreciate your view and what you're doing. Thanks, Josh Epo. Oh yeah, so yeah, I wanted to say in general, like, because I know at the beginning of this, I said that I thought he would have something to say about how, like, old MMOs are more, they let you do more. And this was not that at all. This was very different. This was just about how old MMOs had more challenge, more adversity in, like, the general process for everyone. And I think that's generally true. I do think, like, it would be inaccurate to say that, like, endgame boss fights, like, optional boss fights are any easier. They're harder, they have more mechanics and stuff. It's just, like, the person who gets there has gotten better. And, like, earlier I said, the bottom's gotten worse, right? And what I mean by that is the bottom comprises more casuals, more folks who barely play or barely know how to play. Whereas before there were barriers to even get to that level, to get the game. Final Fantasy XI had, like, a ton of download. It was ridiculous. WoW had discs and, like, yeah, I don't know. It was probably a little more complicated than it is now. Computers were harder to come by. So I think it's important to note, and also, like, less people played video games overall. So I think it's important to note from, like, different demographics and stuff. So I think it's important to note that, like, you are really trying to make sure that all these folks have, like, an experience that they are able to, like, enjoy the money they spent on the game. They're not going to be complaining all day. I know, like, when I was 12 and stuff, there were a lot of games I never beat. And if I was older, and if I was spending my own money on that game, maybe I would have felt some way about that. I still played a lot of them for a good amount of time, but, like, the segments where it's just, like, literally pointless, and it's just not designed properly, and, like, it's too hard. Those were just so silly. I never got to max level in WoW, which was more of my fault, but I didn't like how long it took to get XP. But I probably should have been able to by, like, And I don't think I ever ended up hitting max level until they shrank the level cap. And before that, like the okay, wow, that makes me sound like a casual. To be fair to me, I didn't play like a ridiculous amount after like I was a teen, and like I ended up getting like close to max level, but it was so long. And like I'm someone who actually likes to like at least see what's there, right? Like I didn't like try and optimize my path. I like try to do like all the quests in a zone and like figure out what zone was like a good story worth experiencing. And it always really annoyed me when I couldn't experience the full story and yeah, all that stuff in WoW is annoying. I'm happy with the current day in a way, but I wish it was easier to access the older content too. Like, I don't know. I wish I could play through everything, even though it's not that good. And I guess I can now. I've played through like a few more campaigns than I have before because of the changes, which is cool. All right, let's keep reading comments. I don't really know what I'm saying anymore. I know for me, the old MMOs gave me an experience that I had never encountered before. WoW was like a new world, vibrant and beautiful that I could journey around. I had to learn everything about the game. I don't think the impact of a new genre can be duplicated. WoW engaged me and I loved it. Society was different, internet access was limited or impossible, and everything was bright and new. It wasn't a matter of difficulty or engineering that made the game what it was, it was the fact that it was all new. Yeah, I think that's like 95 to 100% true. Um, right? Like you can just ask kids nowadays, especially as they grow up. Like I think there's always going to be like a few kids who are like, yeah, the older stuff was cooler. Like broadly, like kids nowadays seem to like the games that are getting made for them. And I do think like this isn't always a great argument, right? Like predatory games that prey on like our habits and our brains and like gambling, like stuff like that is always going to be like addictive to children who aren't really developed enough to necessarily have the facilities to like realize this is bad. And even like older folks don't necessarily have that. So like that's important to note. But I do think when you throw a kid into like Final Fantasy 14 or even modern WoW for the first time, they do have a lot of fun still. Like I my little sister is 6 and I had her just running around in WoW like on my super high level character just like in old level content just one-shotting mobs and being really happy about that. So maybe that isn't always the best way to get a gauge either. But for the older folks who like have grown up with these newer games and are growing up, I feel like there's a lot of interesting discussion to be had there and how they view it versus older games and stuff. I can remember every MMO that I played with a lot of adversity. That I played 15 plus years ago, while new MMOs with a lot of instant gratification gets forgotten as soon as I uninstall them. I will probably remember those old MMOs for the rest of my life and think back to them as a great experience and wish those days will come back. New MMOs just feel kind of pointless, they have no lasting impact on me, that's what made me fall in love with MMOs in the first place. Could just go play MOBA or shooter. Saving Grace, currently old school RuneScape Iron Man. Um, It was honestly an amazing and satisfying experience. I think like this isn't is part of that just aging. Like what the person right above him said. And I think like or them. I think like this is always the issue you get into when you're talking about stuff like this is sometimes people just dress up nostalgia in like a really fun way, right? And like it's hard to tell it's just nostalgia, but it is just nostalgia. And then there's other times where it's like genuine points. Like maybe old school RuneScape is doing something different with an Iron Man. That's really cool. That does like speak to those old ways. But also maybe it's just because it's old school RuneScape and you're really nostalgic for it and it is an optional difficulty modifier, right? Like current games can have optional difficulty modifiers. And I guess a lot of them, like, this goes back to me thinking the third option was probably the best one, right? Like, maybe Final Fantasy 14 should have, like, an optional higher difficulty solo duty. Or, like, maybe WoW should have, like, again, optional higher difficulty content. And, like, I think part of the issue here is, like, a lot of gamers nowadays really prioritize efficiency. and efficiency is more apparent, and what efficiency is more obvious to a lot of people. So like, why should you group up for this difficult content? And like, let's say the choice is, right, like you either do the solo version of a quest or you do it in group content, like in Lost Ark as an example, with how its dungeons work as you level up. I think like a lot of folks just choose whatever seems easier or fastest to them, and as a result, it just becomes wasted effort on higher difficulty content that a small fraction of the player base ever goes through. Um, so yeah, it's hard. And like old school RuneScape Iron Man is like its own unique thing. It is like unique in the gaming world, I think, to a large degree. All right, so continue reading these comments. Sorry, these are really interesting to me. Um, we had a dwarf only guild in Classic WoW where we cleared all but the last raid while missing 3 of the 8 classes. Self-imposed restrictions make for super refreshing and novel experience. Yeah, I think giving players the space to have their own restrictions and not even having like it officially supported in the game by like having an Iron Man mode, that is also another cool route. Um, I wasn't blessed with it, like having things that like make you distinct can then like have a impact where you can choose to lean into these distinct things to do a unique things in a game that no one else has ever really done. Um, wasn't blessed with the joy of playing old MMOs because of localization. First MMO experience was back in '08 with Perfect World, Passing Thing. First MMO was ArcAge to immerse yourself. Tried every new one. Couldn't completely given up on the genre. Couldn't play an MMO releasing. Went back. Aside from WoW, still hate. Now completely in love with EverQuest 2 and DDO and can't stop playing. All MMOs have something about them that feel magic. I don't know what it is. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I don't know, maybe some people just also are like more suited for older MMOs, even nowadays, even if they were born like, or yes, this person wasn't even necessarily like they could be in like in their like they could be like older than me as an example, given their comment, because it sounds like they just lived in a country where they didn't have that available to them. Um, so it's interesting. Like maybe there is just like a generational divide too in what you grew up with, right? Where like even if you didn't necessarily like, and I mean I'm assuming this person may have played like single player games back then too that were more in like the older style. So maybe older MMOs which like had some more relation to older games than current MMOs do for sure, just speaks to them more. Always heard this referred to as type 2 fun. It describes both athletic endeavors, but also why MMOs are so great when done right. This is true. Alright. Easy to learn, hard to master. That's true. That's like basically what this can all be summarized as. Your game should be kind of easy to learn. There should be a lot of hard stuff there for people to explore if they want. And I think that's like a good point. And probably a good point to end on, because I'm just rambling at this point and repeating myself, and this video is really long. I've added like 20 minutes to this. Surprise if you watch all of it. Thank you so much if you did, and even if you didn't. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye! Hey folks, thank you so much for watching. Remember to like the video, subscribe on YouTube, follow on Twitch, and have a great rest of your day. Bye!